Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. We have a very special guest today, Frank Baker. I should call Ambassador Frank Baker. You from the UK. He was ambassador. Wait, help me with this, Frank. You were ambassador to Libya. Iraq? Where Libya, Iraq, and
And
Kuwait. Is
Kuwait.
that correct?
Yeah, yeah, that's
Okay.
right. Yeah.
All the
Then
great
in,
garden
in
countries of
reverse
the
order, I
world.
was ambassador to Kuwait, then Iraq, then Libya.
Wait. Were you in Kuwait when first Desert Storm took place? I mean, not first Desert. When we invaded Kuwait with
No, no, no,
America?
no.
No, 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 no. You're not that old, right? You're not that old.
No,
So.
you never invaded Kuwait. You liberated Kuwait.
Oh, that's right. Liberation, invasion. Those words just kind of mess me up. I never know. They're all the same to me, I guess.
There's
So,
pretty important a difference there, Dane.
well, that's why I need you to keep me, to correct me and keep me sane here. So, I'm sorry, I'm a little jet lagged, so you have to forgive me. So anyway, Frank, thanks for being with me today, and thanks for being back on the show. So let's get started. Well, before we talk about Britain or UK politics and their foreign policy and what's going on, as we all know, as all the world knows, there's a lot going on in the Middle East. As we just talked about, you spend a lot of time in the region. Kind of give me just kind of your take on what's going on with Israel and Iraq and Iran and all that.
Yeah, well, first of all, to say it's great to be back on the show, Dane. I mean, strangely enough, or maybe not, last time I was on the show, we talked a bit about what was going on in Syria back at the beginning of the year, and especially the effect that was going to have on the situation across the Middle East. And I think we talked quite a lot then about how that was going to affect the Russians in particular, and their problems with access to the world's navigational channels. I mean, I think what we've seen this year has been a real the beginnings of a fundamental change across the Middle East. You can trace this back to really you can trace this back, I think, to October 7, 2023, and the appalling incident, the appalling terrorist attack on Israel by Hamas. And what's happened since then you've seen unfold has been a real sense of a kaleidoscope being thrown up in the air, and none of us are really sure where it's going to come down. And the latest iteration of that, of course, was the war between Israel, and I'll call it a war because it was a short war, 12-day war they're calling it, between Israel and Iran, and then the involvement of the United States at the very end to try and take out, depending upon who you believe, the Iranian nuclear program. So I think what you're now seeing is an opportunity, really, in many ways, as well as a threat, but an opportunity to reshape the power across the Middle East. One of the things I think it's been very interesting to see is the reaction of Arab governments, not necessarily the people, but Arab governments to what's been going on. And of course, there was criticism, as you would have expected, of the attacks on Iran, but there was also major criticism of the Iranian attack against the American base in Qatar. And the Arab governments, I think, have tried to play this very carefully with a very balanced hand. And I think it's definitely worth watching. One can't second guess what they what they really believe, but I think that's worth watching very carefully. It's what are the Arab governments saying in public? If you move away from the usual rote responses of, say, the Arab League, what are the Arab governments really saying in public, and even more importantly, what are they actually saying in private? So I think that's something to watch over the next few months. I mean, I think that, as I say, the kaleidoscope has been thrown up in the air. We don't know how it's going to come down. It's a very interesting and indeed quite a dangerous time at the moment. But I think it's worth watching. But my views, I always say to people, is just watch carefully, listen carefully to what the Arab governments are saying.
It's interesting. And this segues directly into the United Kingdom. I mean, as you talked about, America, yes, we decided to bomb the nuclear facilities. It depends on which intel you want to listen to as far as how successful they were. Why weren't the Brits involved? Why did they choose to sit on the sidelines? And why are they not involved in what's happening more aggressively in the Middle East?
Well, I think there are two parts to this, Dave. I mean, if you recall, if you go back a few months to the first big Iranian attack on Israel, when they sent the hundreds of drones and the missiles across to attack Israel, the UK was involved then, alongside allies, including the United States, but including other allies, in helping to shoot down a lot of the drones shooting down. The RAF were involved in responding to that attack. More recently, I think what we've seen is that, firstly, the attack on Iran itself, there was clearly a decision taken by the British government, and indeed every other government around the West, with the exception of the United States, not to get involved in any direct attacks on Iranian territory. Number one. Number two, why the Americans and not anybody else? Well, the Americans, of course, are really the only ones that have got the hard power to actually go in and try and destroy that part of the Iranian nuclear program that was buried so deep underground. So nobody else could have done that. Only the Americans could have done that. That said, of course, don't forget that the American bombers are. The American bombers must have. I'm not sure what route they took, but my guess is they must have overflown Europe en route to Iran. So, in a sense, indirectly, people were involved. Lots of countries were involved. It's the same as a lot of countries have been indirectly involved because Israeli missiles, Israeli missiles have crossed across Arab airspace, probably at 40,000 feet, but nevertheless across Arab airspace on their route to Iran and vice versa. So, countries, there's not much countries can do about it, indeed. But I think on this particular occasion, the reality is that when you come to the decision that was taken in Washington, that the Americans would get involved to take out, or to try and take out, as I say, the jury is out on how successful that was, that part of the Iranian nuclear program that was so deeply buried, maybe still is so deeply buried, that only the Americans had the hard power to do that.
Well, there's so many different areas I want to go into here. So let's talk about UK foreign policy overall. I mean, do you believe that the current Prime Minister Starmer is being aggressive enough and participating enough in foreign policy when it comes globally? I mean, I know he talked about the coalition of the willing against Ukraine, but where does, as a diplomat, a former diplomat, where do you believe the UK is? I mean, are they doing what they should be doing, or should they be doing more?
Well, I think you need to take a step back before you answer that question. And you've got to think about what is foreign policy. The foreign policy is an extension of domestic policy. It always has to be. Foreign policy. The age-old argument about foreign policy is that tension between interests and values. And you can argue either way. Which one should trump? Should it be interests, or should it be values? Or should, of course, in an ideal world, you try and pursue both, but often that's not possible. Domestic policy is important. People say, you're never going to win an election because of foreign policy, but you can lose elections because of foreign policy. And so foreign policy for any country, I think, has to be seen within the context of the domestic policy as well. And the reality here is that the Prime Minister is under a lot of pressure from elements within his own party to take a particular position. I mean, there is no secret that the elements of the Labour Party have historically been very, very anti-American, have historically been very pro organisations around the world that others will call terrorists, have historically been it's historically been quite difficult for the Labour Party to balance out. You go back to the 1960s when Harold Wilson, the then Labour Prime Minister, kept the United Kingdom out of Vietnam. Well, with hindsight, that was a pretty smart thing to do. But at the time, there were a lot of people who were arguing that was not the right thing to do, that we should have been shoulder to shoulder with our American allies, just like the Australians were. So but it has to be seen in that context, Dane. And at the moment, I think the Prime Minister is having to walk a very difficult tightrope. Now, it is interesting that here there are many people who believe that the only real successes of the current government have come in foreign policy. And by that, I mean because of the trade deal that was struck with the American president. However incomplete that may be, nevertheless, there are only two countries that have actually so far have come up with a trade deal with the American president, and those are, of course, the United Kingdom and Vietnam. So I think that people will see that as a success. I think that the the foreign policy side of the argument around how the Prime Minister is doing. Also would look at the reset with Europe, and again there are many different views on whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. But I think overall people see that as you don't want to be in a constant state of friction with European allies. I don't think people would disagree with that. I think that the issue there is whether the United Kingdom has given away or has seemed to have given away too much in those talks. And there are other examples as well. So I think in the first year, and it's probably worth remembering that we're only a year into the current government, but in that first year, there are many people, or some people, a lot of the commentators in this country, certainly, well, some of the commentators in this country, let me not say a lot of them, but some of the commentators in this country would argue that the only success that the British government has had has been in the areas of foreign policy. At the same time, of course, that there are big question marks over some of the other decisions that have been taken. There is huge scepticism, huge question marks around the decision to hand over the Chagos to Mauritius, a country that never had the Chagos. It's not people say it's righting a historical wrong, but you can't right a historical wrong by giving over territory to a country that never owned it. So there are a lot of question marks around that. So it's a fairly mixed bag in many people's eyes.
I think about the Chagos Islands, it's one of those things where, once again, one of the big issues in the UK is about the economy, right? So you give over the Chagos, and then you not only give it over, then you decide to start paying them for the same rights you had before. So economically, I don't know. As an outsider, I never quite understood what the Chagos Islands, why that decision was made. But we make a lot of decisions in America that don't make any sense either. But what about the relationship between the UK and China? I mean, there's a big debate there now about whether to allow the Chinese certain land to build their embassy. Some people argue that the British government is just kind of bending over backwards to China just to appease them for various reasons. I mean, where do you think that relationship stands?
Well, again, I think it goes back to that issue, that question about interests and values. And I think there's another point, actually, Dane, I will come back to your question. I'm not trying to avoid answering it, but there's another issue here about foreign policy, and that is that it's also about strategic and tactical. And one of the big problems I think that we face collectively in the West these days is that foreign policy is much more effective when it is part of a strategic long-term approach. But the pressure these days of 24/7 media coverage, for instant media gratification, means that it's much harder in the current world, especially in the West, but probably across the globe, except in those countries that have got autocratic regimes in charge, to pursue single-mindedly strategic approaches to problems, because you're always being criticised, attacked, asked about what is going to happen in the next hour, rather than what is going to happen in the next 40 years. And there's a really good example of this, I think, in Iraq, where you go back to 2003, and it doesn't matter these days whether you opposed it or you agreed with the policy or opposed it. I think if you look at Iraq today, notwithstanding a lot of the commentary in the Western media, Iraq is in a much better place than it was 25 years ago. Economically, it's booming. A mutual friend of ours, actually, I won't mention his name, but a mutual friend of ours has been in Baghdad for the last week or two, and he was saying to me, he hadn't been there for about 5 years. He said he couldn't believe how much the Baghdad has improved over the last 5-10 years. The building is going ahead. Everything is entirely back to normal. People are going around. There's no security threat. It's same down in Basra. I mean, look, I'm not saying this is a utopia. There are still huge problems in that country, particularly around issues like corruption. But fundamentally, it's an interesting example of a country that really has got itself back on its feet and is now running big budget surpluses because of the price of oil, etc. Now, I mention this not because I feel strongly one way or the other about whether what happened in 2003 was right or wrong, but because I do remember our former Prime Minister Tony Blair saying very clearly, look, this was back in 2004-05, Iraq is not about a year, Iraq is generational. Judge us on what we have done in Iraq. in a generation's time, and that time is about now. And it is interesting. It would be very interesting to see a piece about the situation in the country in Iraq today, where, as I say, I think it is hugely different to what is probably still in most people's minds of everybody going around in armored cars with lots of security guards, and that because of the threat of IEDs, roadside explosions, etc. Well, that just no longer is true in today's Iraq. Sorry, I didn't answer your question on China. Let me come back to China. Have we got time before we go for the break?
Well, we have time. We actually only have four minutes left, but I do have a question about Tony Blair. So go to China real quick, and then I need to ask about Tony.
Look, I can't answer for Tony Blair. But China. Look, I mean, China is part of this, isn't it? Here's the dilemma. Do you take a long-term strategic approach to China, or do you take a short-term approach, a tactical approach? And that's the question. Now, I think that if you go back 10 years, this is instructive. If you go back, say, to the beginning of the coalition government back in 2010, so what's that, 15 years, the then Chancellor George Osborne and the Prime Minister David Cameron talked about the golden era of Chinese-British, Sino-British relations. They worked very hard at that, of improving their relationship with China. Now, that hit the buffers because of various issues that occurred both bilaterally but also internationally over the last 10, 12 years. So, again, they went for the quick win. The question is, do you go strategic or do you go tactical? I think that strategically, you have to deal with China, or tactically, you have to deal with China. You can't not deal with China. China is the second largest economy in the world, although no longer catching up to the American economy. Interestingly, it is a powerful player, particularly around Asia. It has expansionist tendencies in the South China Sea. We see that all the time. That's no secret. But you have to deal with that. You have to talk to them. You can't just turn your back on them. At the same time, what I think you mustn't do, this is my view, is become over reliant on them economically, which I think is a mistake that the people have made across the West. I think all our shops are full of Chinese-made goods, which satisfies the consumerism of Western society. Now, that's got to be factored into whatever approach you take to China. So, and there are many others as well, which we don't have time to go into here. But it goes back to the point that foreign policy is multifaceted, but ultimately it comes down to strategic and tactical, and it comes down to interests versus values.
No, I agree with you 100%. This is what a lot of people don't get, in my opinion, is that foreign policy is not black and white. You just can't just say that absolutely this is going to happen or this is going to happen. And I feel for leaders, I really do, when it comes to foreign policy, because in many cases, I believe it's even more difficult to deal with foreign policy than domestic policy. But real quick to Tony Blair, because you brought Tony Blair up. I was watching a series on Netflix about the London, bombings in, I think, 2005. And Tony was on there, the Prime Minister was on there. And so I want to take that and talk about what's recently happened in the Middle East. Do you have any concern that terrorism might be on the rise again because of American and Western involvement in the Middle East, or do you think that that's nothing we should be concerned about?
Oh, I think we should always be concerned about terrorism. Terrorism's never gone away. It's just that in many ways the intelligence service and security services have got even better at stopping it. But it's interesting you say this, Dane, for two reasons. One, because of course yesterday was the 20th anniversary of the tragic London bombings, of the terrorist attack on London, and secondly because this morning they announced that Lord Tevitt, the former British cabinet minister, had died, who of course was injured and his wife was paralysed in the Brighton bombings, the IRA terrorist attack on the Brighton Grand Hotel in Brighton in 1984, and there was a chilling statement put out by the IRA after that attack, which was, "You got lucky today. We only need to get lucky once." And that's the problem with terrorism. That is true. The terrorists only have to get lucky once. We have to get lucky all the time. Terrorism is always there. There's always a threat. Undoubtedly, there are many terrorist threats facing the United Kingdom at the moment, facing the United States at the moment, facing all countries around the world at the moment. and it therefore behoves upon all of us to remain vigilant, and to work with our security services and intelligence services to try and stop those attacks from happening and being successful.
It is interesting when you think about terror, because one of my concerns is the fact that, even if Iran has been silenced in some ways, one of my biggest concerns is that Iran has definitely always been a backer of terrorism. Who knows what's going to happen? But I don't. My personal opinion, and make it very clear, is that I don't see that Iran is just going to sit back and just say it's all over. I just don't think that's going to happen. But hopefully, I'm wrong in that regard. Well, Frank, it's always a pleasure, and really, there's so many things I want to talk to you about. Really are. We didn't even get to Trump and his foreign policy, because I definitely want to talk to you about that, and the good guys versus the bad guys and all that kind of stuff. So I would love to have you back. It's never enough time. But anyway, I look forward to seeing you when I'm back in London, and thanks for being on the show, and we'll talk again soon. Okay.
Okay, Dane, and always a pleasure and always happy to come on.